is, well, I want what he has, but I think people and organizations are a lot messier than what we measure. So I want to complement our approach with what he has, but boy, I don't want to depend on that solely. So you mentioned, yes, specifically, how do we measure productivity? Well, instead of just viewing it top down, like, here's your job and I'm going to measure how many calls you complete, blah. One of the things we found is that this really is a serendipity machine, and innovation comes from the bottom as well. So work that wouldn't have been measured. So somebody somewhere has an idea, somebody somewhere experiments with it, and good old internet fashion, people build on it. Those contributions elicit further contributions and expertise, and you have a movement, a purposeful movement that accomplishes some work goal. Not one that was handed down by a boss, not one that was necessarily measured, but yet that produced real value. And so I'd love those measures, as well as a portfolio of other kinds of measures that allow me to tap into that kind of richness and diversity of contribution that people are wired for.
And I would say that's important. I completely agree with you on that, right? Now, the idea that in the call center, it makes sense, but I actually think the issue in terms of how we view productivity, like today we like to think of productivity as like, this stuff that I made, that's how productive I am. And that's actually a very, very poor way of measuring productivity, right? Because let's say I think actually this idea of interruptions is interesting. Because let's say I've got someone coming to my desk, and they're interrupting me, right? Every 5 minutes. And so I'm getting very, very little stuff done. But if every time someone talks to me, I make them 10% more effective, and I talk to 50 people on a given day, well, that should be my job, right? In terms of the issue is that I don't get rewarded for this, right? And now the issue is how do you actually create systems around this that do reward people for that? But I think, to your point, the idea that I don't really care as much about what an individual does. I care what the group does, what the company outputs. And to the extent that these measures can help sort of show really what's going on and what the value is there, I think that's extremely important.
So Brett and Guy, I want to bring you guys into this discussion.
Doing a great job.
And you're fascinated by their conversation, but how do you look at this issue of productivity or measuring the effectiveness of the systems that you're developing?
Well, we measure the effectiveness. For us, with Sonar app, it's very simple. We see who we message, and then we see if those two people actually meet in the same place. So our metric that we use internally is like how many face-to-face interactions did we engender to the platform, and that's what we consider success. Mm-hmm. So when we're tweaking the UI or we're tweaking the types of combinations or messages that we send, that's the ultimate measure that we define success by.
So Guy, how do you determine that all the data you're collecting is actually being used in some way that makes a difference?
I think that one of the challenges of the sort of data I was talking about is that it's kind of hard stuff. It's not about productivity in a way that you can't kind of do with the measure. And certainly a lot of our business is interacting with finance guys who say, yeah, fine, you talk to 10 people, great, And hey, irrespective of what I think, yeah. And
but there's a cost to collecting, there's a people cost to collecting the data and analyzing the data.
Oh, yeah, there is, undoubtedly. But we're at a stage where, the value that's being driven out of the insights and the data is far beyond any of the costs, because we're beginning to get some low-hanging fruit you can get at pretty easily. And so there's no doubt about that. I think the challenge when you talk about some of these like occupational efficiency, which is what I was talking about, trying to get that correlated with productivity. That one room that's only occupied once a month. My sort of data says, well, we could do it a different way then, and trying to correlate that with something which is a little bit more difficult for the finance director VP finance to get his head around is a challenge. Because you're trying to get somebody see productivity when they can see hard facts, which they sort of gravitate.
Right. Can I do let's do another audience question. Yes, right there. Sorry, I'm looking in the back, but I don't see any people in the back raising their hands, so it's so easy to pick on the people in the front.
I have a weird question, but just more of a thought.
Oh, but name and company.
Mark Fenninger, Studios Architecture. It's more of a thought exercise than a question, but Imagine the four of you guys are starting a company now, and you're going to envision what your office is going to be like 10 years from now. You guys all have some interesting takes on how to use data, how to approach data, how to use social networks as a way of improving the way we work. What do you see that you've heard from the others that you would say, hey, I want to take what this guy's done and change my environment like that? From each of you.
Well, I can start. I actually have something that sort of to try to draw sort of us all together from in that vein, right? In this idea that I sort of draw a lot of inspiration from some things that like Amazon does. So you think about like the type of A/B tests that websites do, right? And that like Amazon or Facebook or Google or whatever, they'll have, like let's say Amazon wants to test out a new homepage, right? They'll send out 50 homepages to like tens of thousands of people and see how those different people actually interact and how it affects their behavior. They'll pick the ones that work and then they'll roll those out, right? Now think about what if you actually applied that to organizations, right? What if you could do that same type of A/B testing, the same sort of experimentation within companies? And so you think about the platforms that we have today. So you've got like Sonar, which is actually how do you connect people? And who are the right people? Well, there's many different ways you can define that. If that's an organizational lever, that could be really interesting. And now that lots of things are going on through internal social media, again, another really huge lever that you can start to change the way those work, actively experiment with it, and actively experiment with the buildings and really see how all these things are changing. And that could be this really transformative experience in terms of how companies are actually managed.
Yeah, we wouldn't have an office, the four of us. We'd work largely online, we'd live online, you'd be in comfortable places for the most part, you'd eat well, so a lot of your social interaction would be over food, particularly in a place like New York City.
Hair would be optional.
Hair would be optional. Yeah. Exactly right. You two guys are going to have to make some adjustments.
Hey, you did sort of line up on stage.
And when we needed higher bandwidth kind of communication, we would read up the tools, right? So we use Skype or Google Hangouts or whatnot, and then we would get the richer interaction, whether it's a working group or in a great, comfortable space. For me to go to 60 Wall Street, where public internet is blocked and the light's not so good, like, why would I? Why would I? I can do 95% of my work on my iPad, and then we come together when it's really meaningful, not just because somebody said so. That'd be my office.
No, I think if it was four of us, that's fine. But if we've got a business of X tons of thousands of people we're looking at, I think that this balance between the flexibility that people want to live and work in the way you describe, which is absolutely right, so many of us are working that way, with the undeniable connecting glue that a working environment brings to an organization, and all of the sort of identity and so on that it creates. I think that balance, when you're looking at making a big organization, is different. For four of us, I guess we can do it a little bit more.
So if I work with our service center in Pune, I don't know how much of a...
No, I agree. But when you've got, I think, there's no... with our organisation, when we moved to international reporting and we distributed the organisation, we gained a lot of efficiencies in many ways, but we also lost an awful lot of things in many ways as well. And one thing, I was the MD of the UK business at the time we did that, and I came out thinking, there was a really connecting force that building, that workplace created, and efficient though it was. And it's something we missed.
When was that? Did you have a social network?
No, we didn't.
He'll set one up for you.
I mean,
That's true, we didn't.
Are we starting a business, or are we running a business that's been going for 10 years? I'm a neophyte to what you guys do, but my assumption would be that as the certainty level increases, the need for more frequent, less formal interaction also increases. So if people are just executing on something that's clearly defined, then yeah, it's easy for us to send each other an email and a little status report. But if we're trying to build a new product, and I imagine this is why innovation comes up all the time in these conversations, is because when you are innovating, you don't actually know what you're supposed to be doing, so you need to be communicating more frequently, which is why proximity is probably more important in those cases. It's probably obvious.
Okay, one more question. Way over there. Back first. Yeah.
Hey, this is Alex from the 5M project. I'm just curious, two things. One is, how do you measure the pathway of a good idea, an idea in the company that actually grows into something that like they move on and they sell and make a lot of money from? How do you actually measure that the way it ping pongs throughout the organization? That's one piece, and then the other piece is you guys are talking about data, kind of intra-data within the company, but what about the company, and we talk so much about innovation happens at the edge, and it's the company interacting with outside users and with partners and all that kind of stuff, and so how do you actually measure that sort of interaction around productivity?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I'll start. I can only speak to some of that. In terms of how you measure the actual way an idea spreads throughout and actually grows into something, that's something sort of quantitatively that's very, very difficult to do. Just in general, computers aren't that good at understanding content today. If you try to get a computer to do it. And there's probably some ways, again, if you're sort of curating a community and actually looking at this stuff, that you can bring out examples. But if you're telling me that, like if I want to develop an algorithm that does that automatically, that's actually extremely difficult. There's lots of people trying to do that, but there's not a good answer for that. So the second part of the question, in terms of trying to look at, companies are in an ecosystem, right? And whether it's other companies, whether it's the community, and really understanding how they fit and how they're actually collaborating with that community is extremely important. Now, the type of data that you need to look at that quantitatively is very different. A lot of the companies that we work with, what we'll do is we'll look at their digital and communication and phone calls, and we'll look at what different constituencies they're interacting with. So you'll sort of code, we don't look at the actual names or anything like that, but we look at, they talk with someone from company X, or they're talking with other people who are in different locations. So they call these people. And you look at those networks and try to sort of back out, how does that indicate that you're collecting data from outside the company? Again, to the extent that we start collecting data from all these different companies, and again, in the future, whether it's us or somebody else, everyone is going to have within 5 years these sort of ID badges, and so then as you have this sort of worldwide network of this sort of data, then you are going to be able to look at those sort of interrelationships at a much finer level of detail.
So thank you very much. They will be up here and you can take some questions informally when we break. We now have a 30-minute break. We will ask you to come back at 3:35. Again, we will give you a voice of God warning to come back into the room. And please remember to fill out your card.